There are a lot of mistakes that people make when just getting into overlanding. So in this video, I am going to address 5 of the biggest and most common mistakes that people new to overlanding make, many of which I have made myself. And take it from me, making these mistakes sucked. Make sure to stick around to the end because I'm also going to share the mistake I see people make all the time that is downright dangerous. So let's jump right in. All right, and mistake number 1 is going all in on gear before getting out on your first overland adventure. Now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, I need to be prepared. So of course I need to get all the gear in order to have a fun, safe, and successful trip. And this thought process is also perpetuated by so many overland themed YouTube channels where the amount of gear they carry is extensive and oftentimes the vehicle build-outs are extreme. But let me explain why this is such a big mistake. You see, overlanding is different for everyone, and the gear that works well for one person may not work for another. There are so many factors that go into getting the right gear for you that the best way to figure out what gear you actually need is to start with a minimalistic approach where you have all the necessary basics but nothing more. And taking this approach reduces the amount of gear you need to buy as you're getting started, and it has the added benefit of allowing you to get out on your first overland adventure sooner, since you don't feel the need to have all the things before you undertake that first trip. And on to mistake number 2, not properly planning for all weather conditions. So you're in the final stages of planning for a trip. You check the weather along your planned route by finding some towns nearby that you can get weather data for, and you find out that the forecast calls for clear skies and mild temperatures. Great news, you think. Packing will be easy. A handful of t-shirts, some shorts, a pair of long pants, maybe a hoodie and a light jacket, and you're all set. Wrong. You just made a big mistake. Those towns that you just checked the weather for, well, chances are they're down at lower elevations, whereas the route you have planned heads up a few thousand feet into the surrounding mountains where temperatures, especially at night, could be substantially colder. Not only that, but the weather at those elevations can be unpredictable, and it is not uncommon for a sudden, violent thunderstorm to roll through, bringing with it a deluge of rain. And you didn't bring a rain jacket. And if it sounds like I'm speaking from experience here, it's because I have made this exact mistake. And let's just say, from my experience, it was such that I won't make it again. In fact, a perfect example of this was a trip we took to Death Valley, where the forecast called for highs over 100 degrees, and yet, in the hottest place on planet Earth, with the forecast calling for hot weather, we found ourselves in a sub-freezing night at 6,000 feet on top of a ridge. I promise you that none of us saw it coming, but thankfully we had the proper clothing and the gear to make it where it wasn't really a big deal. But I'll tell you again, from personal experience, almost nothing ruins a trip faster than not having proper clothing for the weather you encounter. All right, on to mistake number 3, and that is going it alone. This one is big. And that's because in the beginning, when someone is just getting into overlanding, there is a lot to learn. Vehicle prep, gear selection, route planning, emergency preparedness, and the list goes on and on and on, honestly. And trying to go it alone on your first few trips means that all of that rides on your shoulders. And I really believe that this is the #1 reason why so many people never actually get out on their first trip, because trying to figure out all of those things, it's a lot. But going with someone else or with a group of people who are experienced does a lot to alleviate those challenges. Chances are they'll have more gear than you, and they can lend you something that you may not have. They'll probably lead the route, so you don't have to take care of all the route planning duties yourself. Plus, and this is a big plus, Having another vehicle with you is also the best thing that you can do to increase safety on an overland trip. If you get stuck, there's another vehicle to pull you out. If you have a breakdown or run out of gas, there's another vehicle that can go and get help. And if you're saying, well, I don't know anyone else who overlands, that's okay, because there are a ton of great overland communities out there that coordinate group trips. My recommendation is to look for groups in your area on Facebook. Chances are there's at least one, if not more, where you can find people to go out on adventures with while you're getting your feet wet. Mistake number 4, trying to keep a rigid schedule. Oh, have I been guilty of this one. If you are new to overlanding, it is really common and really tempting to think of an overland trip in the same way that you would think of a traditional road trip, planning an itinerary, creating start and end points for each day, and creating mileage-based goals. And while this isn't necessarily a bad thing, having a plan is certainly a good thing. It is a mistake to assume that you can average a set speed, let's say 20 miles an hour, and reach a set destination in a set amount of hours. And this is because when it comes to overlanding, the only guarantee, and I mean the only guarantee, is that there will be setbacks. Roads will become more challenging, slowing your pace. Reroutes are likely to be required as road closures happen often, whether due to being on private land, forest fires, washouts, or any other number of things. Vehicle breakdowns or setbacks are more common since you're going to be traveling off pavement and on rougher roads in rougher terrain. And whether it be a flat tire or somebody getting stuck, if your plans are rigid and you don't allow for flexibility due to the unforeseen, it will result in a lot of stress and frustration, and that can ruin a trip real fast, like really, really fast, like super fast, super fast. So instead of having a hyper-rigid schedule, I strongly suggest that you come up with a rough idea of how far you want to make it and where you want to set up camp, but take each day in stride and be open to changing things when it makes sense to do so. All right, and finally, the 5th mistake that I see people make when they're new to overlanding. And I told you at the beginning of this video that I was going to share the mistake that I believe is downright dangerous, and it is this one, and that is being seriously underprepared and not taking self-reliance seriously enough. This one, again, by far the biggest and most dangerous mistake that a new overlander can make. And while the first mistake I shared in this video involves over-preparation, it is nowhere near as dangerous as being completely and utterly unprepared. If you are planning on venturing out into the backcountry where cell service is non-existent and help is far away, then you should always take proper precautions so that you have the ability to get yourself and your vehicle out of a potentially dangerous situations. And this is one of the areas where overlanding differs so much from like car camping at a state park. Your vehicle should be in good mechanical condition. You should have at least some basic self-recovery equipment, a first aid kit, a fire extinguisher, and ideally a way to communicate with others in areas where there is no cell signal. And the latter can be done with something like this, which is a Garmin InReach or something similar, so that you can communicate at least via text with the outside world, or if things go really bad, you have an SOS button to alert, search, and rescue. I mentioned it earlier in this video, but I'm gonna mention it again here. Having other people with you traveling in another vehicle is a great way to minimize so many of these risks. Now, my intention here certainly is not to discourage anyone from getting out there, because I understand many of the fears and the anxiety that come with getting out on your first trip. I know that I felt all of them. And even to this day, when Christine and I are about to head out on a big trip, I feel a little bit nervous before we get started. But by respecting the challenge and preparing accordingly, you can mitigate many of the risks that come with overland travel. And if you want to dive deeper into this topic and learn how to get started overlanding, then check out this video next, where I've broken down all the steps you should take, including all the gear that should be considered essential.